All right, now we're going to do part 2 of area of polygons. This time we're going to talk about area of irregular polygons. Now, irregular polygons would be those that do not have standard features of regular triangles, regular rectangles, and regular parallelograms. And we're going to look at finding the area of these by decomposing them into rectangles, triangles, and parallelograms. So first of all, let's review a little bit about formulas of these shapes. Remember, the formula of a rectangle is, and you should know this, length times width. It can also be written as base times height. So sometimes you'll see length times width, sometimes you'll see base times height. And base and length are essentially the same. And a square would be, this one you'll notice S squared, because a square has 4 sides that are exactly the same length. The base is always the same as the height, so you could just say S squared or side squared. Parallelogram, base times height, which is the same as length times height. Triangle, remember, is 1/2 base times height. And our trapezoid, which is the one that's a little bit trickier, is A plus B, or B1 plus B2 times the height divided by 2. So those are just some basic area formulas that you should have memorized. If you don't, you might want to make flashcards or something to make sure you know how to do these. Okay, now let's take a look at these 3 shapes. These polygons would be considered irregular because they don't have properties that make them regular. They don't have all lines parallel. They don't have all right angles. They don't have a relationship to them to make them regular. And so when you're looking at shapes like this that are irregular, there are different things you do to find the areas of these shapes. For these, there isn't one specific formula. One of the things you want to do is split the shapes into shapes you know how to find the area of. Each of these shapes can be decomposed into other shapes, and those other shapes are ones that you know how to find the area of. Once you find the area of each of the smaller parts, you add them together and you can find the total area. So let's give a practice to this. All right, so let's take a look at this shape. This shape is not regular, but looking at it, you can see regular polygons in this shape. It is comprised of other shapes. For example, if I pull this off, I have a rectangle. I have 4 square corners and 2 sets of parallel lines. I can also pull that off, or I can leave it on if I needed to, and have another rectangle. Rectangles are regular shapes, or these are regular rectangles. They have 4 square corners, 2 sets of parallel sides. I can find the areas of this with length times width. I know that area, and if I found the area of these 3 shapes and added them together, I would find the area of my irregular shape. So let's give that a go, or we could do that. Let's take a look at this shape. This shape, you can split it up a couple different ways. One of the easiest ways to do would be to take the top off. And now if you're doing this when you can't move it, you essentially would draw a line across there, dividing it into a rectangle and a triangle. So here, I can move that up. I have a rectangle and a triangle. So I can make that into different shapes. How about this shapes? There's a lot of different shapes you could make into here. You could draw lines there and make 1 large rectangle and 2 smaller rectangles. You could draw lines this way and make 3 rectangles. A lot of times where you draw your lines are going to depend on the measurements that they give you. So this one can be chunked into several different, although that would be a little bit more difficult to do it that way. All right, so this one, what would you do? This one is a little trickier. You can see that there is down and up. But by drawing lines, you could make a triangle, and a rectangle. So that's one way you could divide it up. There's lots of ways you could divide it, but you want to make sure that you're dividing it in a way that you can find the area of regular shapes that you know the formula for. So let's take a look at this one. On this one, we have an irregular shape. We have a 3-foot top, a 9-foot bottom, a 7-foot left side, and a 9-foot slope. Okay, and if we needed to find the area, what we would want to do is figure out how we could decompose this into shapes that we can easily find the area. So looking at it, I can tell that if I drew a line here, I would easily have a rectangle and a triangle. Now comes the part where I have a 9-foot base, and I know that it's base times height and half base times height. How do I figure out that now? One of the things I can look at is this. When I'm drawing this line, and I take this piece and I would move it to the side somewhat, this is a rectangle. As long as I'm going with the assumption that this is a right angle, I made a right rectangle. A rectangle has 2 sets of equal side, which means that this side and this side are both 7 feet, which would mean that and that are 3 feet. Well, if when this is together, the whole thing is 9 feet, and I take it apart, this section is 3 feet, that tells me that this remainder is 6 feet. That also tells me that this right here is 7 feet. So now I have the measurements of my rectangle, and I have the measurements of my triangle. So when I look at that and I have my measurements, now I can use my area formula to figure it out. I know the area of a triangle is base times height, and here I have 3 times 7. So my area would be 21 feet squared. So this one is 21 feet squared. And this one is 1/2 base times height. So on this one I have 6 times 7. And 7 times 6 is 42. But I need to find half. And half of 42 is 21. So I know this is 21 feet squared. Well, when I know that the area of this is 21 and the area of this is 21, and I'm trying to combine them, I'm going to add 21 plus 21. So my total is 42 feet squared. So if we check, I have 21 feet squared, 21 feet squared. 21 feet plus 21 feet is 42 feet squared. So that would be the area of my shape. All right, let's take a look at this one. This one we also would be able to divide into several different ways to divide this. One way to divide it would be I could draw lines this way and make 3 rectangles. I could draw a line this way and make 4 rectangles. There's lots of different ways I could do this. And it really depends on what information and what's the easiest way that you know what it is. One of the things I would look at is just drawing it this way. Because I would know the base is 10 feet, which means that's 10 feet. That's 4 feet, which means that's 4 feet. So those are equal. And up here, they give me the base is 6 feet, which means that's 6 feet and 3. So if I find the area of the 2 big rectangles and add them together, well, base times height here would be 4 times 10, so 40 feet squared. Up here, I have base times height, 6 times 3, 18 feet squared. I add them together, 40 plus 18, 58 feet squared. So once you realize you can divide the shapes up into smaller shapes, it really becomes quite easy. And if we look at our check, 18 feet by 40 feet, click back to check, 58 feet squared. Make sure you're doing the 58 feet squared. When you're finding areas, you're finding squared. All right, I want you to take a look at this one, and I want you to figure out what the area would be of this shape, and then come back and check. Okay, so figuring out this shape. Because I know these are square corners, I would draw another line here, assuming that's a squared corner. That's a squared corner. This is now 9 centimeters. And I know that if this is 14 and that's 9, that has to be 5. So my area of my rectangle would be 12 times 9 because it's A times, or not A times B. Base times height. This would be 18. 108 centimeters squared. And over here, I have 1/2 base times height. So I have 5 times 13. 5 times 13 is 65. And I need to do half of 65, which is 32.5. Is my triangle. So I take my 108, I add it to my 32.5, and I have 140.5 centimeters squared for my trapezoid. Okay? All right, one more shape. So find the area of this trapezoid, and then come back and check. All right, once again, this doesn't say it's square corners, but I'm going to assume it is. So I would draw a square line there. I then know that's 12. If this is 15.2 for all of it, and that's 10.2, I know that's 5. So to do my rectangle, it's 10.2 times 12. And up here, I have 1/2, 13 times 5. So if I do my 10.2 times 12, I get 122.4, and I have to take that and divide it by 2 because this is base times height. Oh, I don't have to divide by 2. 122.4 centimeters squared. Up here, 1/2. Do my 13 times 5 is 65. 1/2 65 is 32.5. I add my 122.4 times 32.5. 9451. My decimal, my answer is 154.9 centimeters squared. And that is how you find the area of irregular polygons.